Tonight, the ultimate betrayal. The ASIO boss reveals a retired politician was recruited by international spies, but he stops short of naming that person.
This politician sold out their country, party, former colleagues to advance the interests of a foreign regime.
Allegations the man charged over a shooting in Sydney's CBD yesterday was armed with a sawn-off semi-automatic rifle. The top US court to decide if Donald Trump should be immune from prosecution on allegations he tried to overturn the 2020 election result. And the Matildas booked their tickets to Paris with a 10-0 thrashing of Uzbekistan. Good evening, Jeremy Fernandez with ABC News. A cloud of suspicion is hanging over dozens and possibly hundreds of former politicians across Australia after the revelation one has been a spy for a foreign country. The head of Australia's top security agency, ASIO, has revealed that the figure sold out their country by joining a wider plot. But with no name and no clarity on whether he or she was a federal or state politician, public demands are being made for more information to expose the traitor. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
Inside a building of secrets,
Welcome to ASIO.
A tantalising glimpse into a clandestine overseas spy ring.
Right now, there is a particular team in a particular foreign intelligence service with a particular focus on Australia.
The ASIO boss revealing how operatives dubbed the A-Team successfully cultivated a former Member of Parliament several years ago.
This politician sold out their country, party, former colleagues to advance the interests of a foreign regime.
With attempted infiltration into the highest levels of government.
At one point, the former politician even proposed bringing a Prime Minister's family member into the spy's orbit.
But when challenged to identify the unnamed culprit...
I'm not going to name the individual. We're a rule of law country.
Instead, Mike Burgess noted that tougher foreign interference laws had been passed since this episode.
Personally, I don't think they'll be stupid enough to repeat what they've done in the past.
The intelligence chief says his decision to publicly call out the A-Team is part of a real-world, real-time disruption, letting the foreign spies know that their activities here have been uncovered. But his decision to not identify the former politician is generating a furious guessing game inside this building, as well as demands for more information.
The former politician who sold out this country could be in this building right now. Why won't you name the traitor now?
It's a matter for the Director-General of ASIO. If he was to choose to name that.
I've said I have a fair idea and I'm being careful about what I say publicly because of that.
There absolutely would be benefit, though, in ensuring that not all former politicians carry some sort of smear or smirch upon them.
Let's not get offended because we're talking about national security matters. It is clearly in the national interest for this to be the subject of national discussion.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a great pleasure.
A very public discussion of work that's usually hidden in the shadows. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
A Chinese-Australian businessman who once ran as a Liberal Party candidate has become the first person convicted of a foreign political interference offence. Sonny Dong has been jailed for 2 years and 9 months. Victoria's County Court heard that the 68-year-old had been in contact with Chinese intelligence officials and was secretly working to advance the aims of the Chinese Communist Party. He was found guilty of attempted political interference over his donation to a Melbourne hospital in 2020 alongside the former MP Alan Tudge. Prosecutors claim Dong was trying to influence Mr Tudge, whom he believed could one day be Prime Minister. There's no suggestion Mr Tudge was influenced or committed any wrongdoing. Dong could be released in 12 months. An arrest in Melbourne that triggered an immediate storm of allegations about the Federal Immigration Minister's competence has turned out to be an embarrassing police bungle. After announcing they'd caught a former immigration detainee over a spate of sexual offences, Victoria Police have admitted they had the wrong man and that he had nothing to do with the 149 people released from detention by the High Court's ruling last year.
Word travels quickly through Parliament House,
My question is to the Minister for Immigration.
particularly when it's about the alleged behaviour of an individual recently released into the community.
Charged with sexual assault, stalking and 2 counts of unlawful assault in Victoria.
Yesterday, police arrested a man who they said was one of the 149 people set free following last year's High Court ruling that indefinite immigration detention for people who can't be deported was unlawful. He appeared in the Melbourne Magistrates Court today, not once, but twice. The charges dropped this afternoon, with police confirming they'd got the wrong guy. A local man not connected to the released detainees, now the person of interest.
With further evidence, it is clear the person arrested is not the offender, and for that we are sincerely sorry that this person has been detained.
The development coming well after the Coalition had sought to make political mileage out of it in question time.
Why did the Minister fail to use his powers to seek to re-detain this serial sex offender and protect these 2 Victorian women?
I am not in a position, and I will not comment on any individual case because I will not risk prejudice any court proceedings.
The opposition weaponising the issue ahead of this weekend's by-election in the Melbourne seat of Dunkley. The Deputy Opposition Leader posting on social media, "If you live in Frankston and you've got a problem with Victorian women being assaulted by foreign criminals, vote against Labor." Susan Lee's office isn't retreating from that sentiment in light of this embarrassing blunder by Victorian police, arguing there's a broader issue at play with how the government has handled the release of this group. And ahead of the Dunkley poll, it's banking on the community feeling the same. Despite Labor's insistence, it's done all it can to keep them safe. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
There are new details of the weapons allegedly carried by a gunman accused of shooting a lawyer in Sydney's CBD. The 79-year-old is facing a string of firearm offences after yesterday's citizen's arrest.
Castlereagh Street returns to normality after yesterday's panic. Around lunchtime, a man walked into a law firm on the 9th floor of this building and allegedly shot 77-year-old Van Cooney in the groin. Mr. Cooney was taken to hospital and is recovering. The accused gunman has since been named as Sinvi Vulik. The 79-year-old was restrained by office workers before police arrived. He's been charged with 7 offences, including shooting at a person with intent to murder and 2 counts each of possessing a loaded firearm endangering life and possessing an unauthorised prohibited firearm. In court documents, those weapons are described as a .22 calibre small handgun and an M1 carbine lightweight semi-automatic rifle which had the shoulder butt removed.
At this stage I can't really say anything, I'm sorry.
You don't know how he's doing?
He's doing all right.
Mr. Vulik didn't appear in court either in person or on the screen. His lawyer requested he be given medical assistance, and the magistrate said all inmates on remand are screened as they enter the system.
The accused is yet to indicate any pleas. Police say the shooting was isolated and not connected to any gang activity. The case returns to court in May. Jamie McKinnell, ABC News, Sydney.
A man is in hospital following a drive-by shooting in Sydney's southwest overnight. Police say a car stopped outside a house in Guildford around midnight when an unknown person inside the vehicle fired a gun. A 40-year-old man who was standing outside the home was shot in the groin. He was taken to hospital in a stable condition. A few hours later, a burnt-out car was found nearby. Police are investigating whether it was the getaway vehicle. This is the second drive-by shooting in Sydney's west in the past 3 days. On Tuesday, a young man was shot dead in a targeted attack outside a home in Fairfield Heights. Police have not confirmed whether they believe the 2 shootings are linked. Police will allege the Sydney police officer accused of killing Jesse Baird and Luke Davies used bullets taken from a local shooting range. Bolamar Condon is facing 2 counts of murder after he allegedly went to Mr Baird's home in Paddington armed with a police handgun. It'll be alleged in court the bullets used were not the ones the senior constable had been issued by the New South Wales Police. The gun was allegedly then checked back into a local police station. The Police Commissioner Karen Webb has confirmed she's taken the first step in removing the alleged double murderer from the force. He's been served with a show cause notice in his isolated cell at Silverwater Jail. The state coroner has declared that the Gold Coast mother, Marion Barter, who's been missing for 27 years, is dead. The Southport schoolteacher suddenly changed her name to Florabella Natalia Marion Remakel before selling her home and leaving her family on a European trip in 1997. She never saw them again. An inquest into her disappearance found she was romantically involved with a man named Rick Bloom. He persuaded Ms. Barter, under the alias Fernandez Remakel, to start a new life with him in Luxembourg. The court found Mr. Bloom had a tendency to exploit vulnerable women for financial gain, 5 of whom provided evidence to the inquest. State Coroner Teresa Sullivan also criticised the New South Wales Police investigation, calling it inadequate. The case went uninvestigated for 10 years, despite pleas from Marion's daughter for police to help find her mother. Shareholders in the financial services company Zip are up in arms over a recent decision by the company to on-sell their shares. A week before the sale process was announced, 2 directors picked up a swag of shares on the market. They've since reaped the benefits as Zip's recovery gathered pace.
It was once a rising star in financial services. Now Zip, the buy now, pay later hopeful, is facing the ire of shareholders who claim they were forced to sell out when the share price was at a 7-year low.
It was an initiative that was a few months in the planning.
The week before the sale plan was announced, the company's chair, Diane Smith-Gander, and another director, Meredith Scott, bought a substantial amount of stock. They complied with the rules, but many small investors feel they were unfairly treated because they have missed out.
I think the purchase of shares by the key executives was a demonstration that they believed in the future of the company and a strong signal to shareholders.
Zip announced the sale plan in October for shareholders who held less than $500 worth of stock. The catch, if shareholders didn't want to sell their shares, they had to opt out by November 20. The ABC has spoken to some shareholders who said the communication wasn't clear. Many only knew their shares had been sold after they disappeared from their brokerage accounts. The company argues these investors were given adequate notice.
Investors were very well informed.
But of the 78,000 affected investors, almost 70,000 had their shares sold. They were paid just over 40 cents a share. Since then, the price has more than doubled. Corporate watchdog ASIC says it has had a small number of complaints about alleged misconduct over the notice, but there was no evidence the company broke the listing rules. ASIC says there's room for companies to make it more clear to investors what action needs to be taken to retain their shares. But the Australian Securities Exchange says the rules won't be changed. Nassim Khadem, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30, could the cost of living hurt the federal government at this weekend's by-election?
I mean, you're sort of worried about what the future's going to be like.
I got 6 children, but it's so difficult.
Thank you. Mortgage relief right now, interest rate reduction right now, cost of living relief right now.
It's a seat the government needs to hold.
Also, comedian Hannah Gadsby joins me to discuss their new show.
The Mardi Gras board is defending its handling of the involvement of police in this Saturday's parade. On Monday night, the organisation announced it was withdrawing the force's invitation to participate after a serving officer allegedly murdered the Sydney couple, Jessie Baird and Luke Davies. But after a backlash, Mardi Gras declared yesterday it had reached a compromise with the police commissioner to allow New South Wales police officers to march out of uniform. Despite the decision, the Australian Federal Police says its officers still won't march. Instead, they'll cheer from the sidelines. Co-chair of the Mardi Gras board, Brandon Bear, insists the group handled the situation as well as it could.
As we made that announcement, and we found that there was community feedback that was really telling us that there was some desire for us to reconsider what we were doing. What we would say is that we're not here to tell anyone how to think or feel.
The President of the Philippines has used a landmark speech to Australia's Parliament to declare he will not back down in territorial disputes with China. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has also spruiked increasingly close security ties with Australia as the two nations signal they'll expand exercises in the South China Sea. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
A once battle-scarred nation grappling with new forms of conflict.
and searching for allies.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the Republic of the Philippines.
It's not a war, but the Philippines and China are at loggerheads in the South China Sea.
The Philippines now finds itself on the front line against actions that undermine regional peace, erode regional stability, and threaten regional success.
With Beijing using its Navy, Coast Guard and even militias of fishing boats to try and force the Philippines out of contested waters.
For many years, the Philippines has been on the front line, subjected to grey zone activities.
That's angered President Marcos, who's edged closer to the West, using his speech in Canberra today to send a clear message on foreign soil.
I will not allow any attempt by any foreign power to take even 1 square inch of our sovereign territory.
Australia's drawing closer to Manila too. Last year, the two nations held their first joint military drills in the South China Sea. Today, signing a new agreement to boost maritime cooperation.
Freedom of navigation is fundamental to our sovereignty, our prosperity, our security.
We must come together as partners to face the common challenges confronting the region. Not one single country can do this by itself.
The president's speech was unusual. Most Southeast Asian leaders want to avoid making a choice between the US and China and would never dream of using language like he did. But Beijing's aggression is hardening resolve in Manila. That creates more of a risk of open conflict, but it also opens new opportunities for countries like Australia. Stephen Jedgetts, ABC News, Canberra.
The Supreme Court in the United States has agreed to hear Donald Trump's claim that he should be immune from prosecution on charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election result. The court, with a Conservative majority, will hear arguments in April, a move which calls into question whether the case could go to trial before the November election. At the same time, an Illinois judge barred the former president from appearing on the state's primary ballot because of his role in the January 6 Capitol riot. But she delayed her ruling due to the Supreme Court hearing. All this coincides with an announcement by Mitch McConnell, one of the most powerful figures in US politics, that he's stepping down, potentially giving more influence to Donald Trump and Republican hardliners.
To lead my Republican colleagues has been the highest privilege. But one of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter.
While Australians grapple with the cost of living crisis, many young Japanese are finding that moving down under is a financial boon. Plagued with low wages and economic hardships, Japan is now officially in recession. So Japanese workers are flocking to Australia in record numbers.
Armed with a small camera, Shoma Tanaka talks candidly to his social media followers about his earnings, expenses and, most importantly, savings.
It is definitely easier to work in Australia. The hours are less than in Japan and the pay is higher in my case, so it's much easier mentally.
Since arriving in 2019, he's worked a variety of jobs. Currently, he's at a metalworks factory, earning twice what he would back home. On his YouTube channel, Shoma explains how the higher income, combined with a bit of frugality, has helped him save $200,000 and buy his dad a new car.
If there are people who are working and feeling a bit frustrated in Japan, I'd like to let them know that there is a path to choose, a working holiday, and there are possibilities for them.
Japan has slipped into recession as the country battles a weak yen and an ageing, shrinking population.
I feel the cost of food is going up, and I'm shocked how much the power and gas bills cost lately.
I'd like to give more and more back to my employees. However, in reality, while the cost of goods and expenses are rising, it's impossible.
The number of Japanese applying to work in Australia has hit record levels as people seek sanctuary from low, stagnant wages.
There is a very strong incentive for Japanese people to, work outside for a certain period and earn money and then come back.
It's not all bad news. Major Japanese firms are posting record profits and the stock market is back to all-time highs. What many workers here want to know is when this good news will flow through to their wallets.
I'm worried about my life. From my point of view, Japan is declining.
Those economic headwinds may take a long time to subside. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
To finance now, retail sales bounced back in January and retailers helped push the local share market higher today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Retail sales rose 1.1% in January, a decent recovery from the 2.1% decline in December. But as you can see from the chart, the big picture is that the amount being spent in stores and online has levelled off after the big rise coming out of the pandemic. And what's more, that rise was all about prices. This chart separates retail sales into volume and value. The volume of shopping has been flat for 2 years, but values have increased by almost 10%, and that's all price. Retailers had a good session on the ASX today after Harvey Norman beat expectations with its profit result. And other results were well received as well, including the hospitals group Ramsay Healthcare, Macquarie Technology and Star Entertainment. The US market was down a bit last night. Iron ore fell 2%. And the Aussie dollar was steady, just above 65 US cents. In other news, Bitcoin has hit a new record high in Australian dollars. It's still about 20% below the 2022 peak in US dollars, but the Aussie dollar has devalued 13% in the past 2 years, so Australian crypto punters have been bigger winners. Meanwhile, the price of carbon dioxide emission allowances in Europe has fallen by half in the past year because emissions are falling and the demand for certificates that let companies emit has also gone down. But the price of the Australian equivalent is rising for the opposite reason. Companies are buying more Australian carbon credit units to cover their higher emissions. And that's finance.
A Cameron Green century has prevented New Zealand from dismissing Australia for a modest total on day one of the first test in Wellington. Green thrived in difficult batting conditions and reached his second test century just before stumps.
Tails. The home team won the toss and had no hesitation in bowling on a green-tinged pitch.
Not too upset with that. Yeah, seems like there's been some first inning scores that have been big, so that's the aim today.
A rare visit to New Zealand from the Australian Test team led to a sold-out crowd at the Basin Reserve.
Isn't that a gorgeous picture?
Australia's openers survived some anxious moments.
Hasn't carried through to Tom Latham at second slip.
The Usman Khawaja-Steve Smith combination was still finding its feet.
They weren't awake to it, New Zealand. They weren't awake to it.
With lunch approaching, the Black Caps finally made a breakthrough.
New Zealand have their first. What a catch from Blundell, and it's Matt Henry.
Marnus Labuschagne's run of low scores in tests continued as New Zealand's pace attack dominated.
Oh, yes! What a ripper from Henry. He's got one to swing and he's got it to swing late.
Travis Head came and went.
There it is.
Allan Border medalist Mitch Marsh decided attack was the best approach, but it brought about his undoing on 40.
High on the bat, and it's a big wicket.
Another West Australian all-rounder stood tall.
Finds the gap. That's a lovely shot.
With wickets tumbling, Green accelerated to his century.
That is 4, that is 100, his second in test matches. What a sensational knock this has been. Cam Green, take a bow.
Just one of those days, and I think someone just needed to bat through, so yeah, I was glad it was me.
Australia ended a hard-fought day with Green unconquered, but only one wicket in hand. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
The rejuvenated Matildas striker Michelle Heyman is proving that age is just a number, with her 4-goal blitz against Uzbekistan rocketing her into the Olympics contention. The 35-year-old's performance was the exclamation mark in the Australians' 10-0 drubbing of the Uzbeks in Melbourne last night, handing coach Tony Gustafsson an even tougher task of selecting the squad for Paris.
After a night to remember for Michelle Heyman, you could barely wipe the smile off her face.
So it was just a really sweet moment to be able to, score a 4. Just wild.
Heyman says the past week has been an emotional roller coaster. 5 years after retiring from international football, the veteran's comeback couldn't have gone better.
A lot of people told me that I couldn't do it, you're too old. So it's really nice to be able to show people that it doesn't matter how old you are.
Heyman's heroics helped the Matildas book a ticket to Paris. The real test will come against the world's best.
Can she bring the pressing intensity and the game out on the field when you have less time and space?
But I do believe in my ability, and I know how hard I've been pushing myself to, get here, but I'm not stopping.
Opportunities ahead of the Olympics will be thin. Australia plays Mexico in April before 2 yet-to-be-announced send-off matches in June.
When we go to governments these days and say there's a Matildas match, they get snapped up pretty quickly. So hopefully it's in a few different cities.
And competition for spots will be fierce. The squad must be cut from 23 to 18.
It's always been cutthroat, and I think that's the nature of, the Matildas setup.
Gustafsson says creating chemistry is key.
So when I select a squad for Olympics, I might leave some players out of that roster that is better individually, but it's about building the best team.
Katrina Gorry has hinted the Olympics could be her farewell.
For most of us, it's probably, could be our last major tournament. So I think, to go out with a bang would be pretty amazing for all of us.
Gorry looking to the future.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Alongside her daughter, Harper. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
The Sydney Kings' hopes for another NBL title are over after going down to the New Zealand Breakers 83 points to 76 in last night's qualifier in Sydney. Parker Jackson-Cartwright finished with a game-high 34 points for the Breakers. The Breakers will now play the Illawarra Hawks after they lost to Tasmania. The Jack Jumpers progressed straight into the playoffs after a 16-point win. Tasmania will face the Perth Wildcats next weekend. Let's take a look at the weather now. And Tommy, we had a hot finish to summer.
Jeremy, temperatures soared today, and for a handful of locations, including Nowra and also Newcastle, they sweltered through their hottest last day of summer on record. Now, Sydney worked to a sticky morning. A low of 23 was 4 above average. Northerly winds then sent the temperature to 40 across much of the west today, but winds turned more northeasterly along the coast, and that made all the difference. The harbour only reached 27 and Wollongong 28. The city reached 33, and that was 7 above average. Capping off a summer which saw maximums at Observatory Hill average 28.2 degrees. That's 2.5 degrees above the long-term average, and out of 165 years of data, Sydney's third warmest summer on record. Last night was very warm across the state's northwest. Minimums were as high as 30, and that was up to 13 above the average. The maximums today were well above 40 across most of the northern inland. The greatest anomaly, though, was 39 degrees in Newcastle, 14 above average. Today's heat helped to fuel thunderstorms, and a warning is current for damaging winds, large hail and flash flooding. Now, here is a radar. Storms hit Western Sydney this afternoon, and they're now sweeping across the lower Hunter. They've already dropped up to 28 millimetres of rain. On the satellite then, well, we can see the band of storms forming today from the northwest towards the coastline. Molong has picked up 33 millimetres. On the chart then, a cooler southerly change is moving up the south coast behind this cold front, while a trough over the inland will trigger further thunderstorms tomorrow. Around the country, a warm start to autumn for our capitals, 32 in Canberra and 34 in Perth. Now, the southerly change just reached Kiama, but it will weaken and stall north of Port Stephens overnight. That will allow hot westerly winds to quickly return to the inland tomorrow. For the northeast tomorrow, a weak cool change overnight for the southern Hunter, but still very warm elsewhere. There's the small risk of showers and storms for the inland. They're most likely on the southern part of the ranges where they could be severe. For the southeast, cooler on the coast, but still warm inland. A medium chance of showers and severe storms for the central tablelands, but grading to only a slight chance of storms elsewhere and staying mostly dry along the coast. To the west, well, still hot tomorrow with a medium chance of showers and storms for most areas. Now, the storms could be severe along the northern half of the slopes and plains. The far south and the far northwest will stay mostly dry. On the waters, we'll have strong winds off the Sydney and the Hunter coast, but that will ease very early. The seas will average 2 metres. Now, for Sydney, a southerly change from about 9 p.m. and partly cloudy tomorrow. Slight chance of a shower or a storm. It's more likely in the west and more likely later. A warm start to autumn, 22 to 30 for the city and tops up to 33 for the outer west. The sun will rise at 6:42 and ahead. A shower or two is on the forecast for Saturday, and there's the chance of a storm, 28 to 30 degrees. Possible shower and storm Sunday, 28 to 30, and then showers will ease for the early part of next week, but temperatures staying pretty warm, slightly above average for March. Jeremy.
Tom, thank you. Here's Sarah Ferguson with 7:30.